Steve Graham. I'm a Strategic Design Director and founder at Stick.
So I'm Hamilton, I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Stick.
So I think when you start thinking about the difference between those practices, it's important to understand that not everyone's going to interpret them all the same way. So whatever anyone says, take it with a grain of salt. The most important thing is that you're adopting the best possible tools, techniques and practice to how you apply and design what it is you're designing. When we talk about UX, we're typically talking about designing a discrete user experience, and that user experience itself has been born out of the technology space. So I talk about it very much typically in the sense of designing a digital product, albeit you can design across multiple touch points in a product and still call it user experience, or you could even be designing a physical product and call it user experience design or a discrete experience. When we start talking about customer experience, we're usually talking more from the marketing lens, more about the customer experience that's had by someone engaging with an organization, a company. And that's really thinking more front of stage. So what happens that touches the customer itself. And then when we shift to service design, we then broaden that to include not only the customer's experience, but also the employee experience and how that's enabled, and the other things behind the scenes that enable a service experience, such as people, process, and technology. Albeit some great customer experience designers or people that identify as that will incorporate all of those things as well, which goes back to that first point that it's more important the practice that you adopt than the title you give yourself. The other thing to keep in mind is that we are seeing that design practice sort of more fully in the customer experience space, and that's important because we're seeing an evolution of language, and the language we use is important because it shapes the way we think, and the way we think shapes the way we can create solutions and designs for our customers and clients.
But I think if you're in a context where anyone's talking about any of those practices, it's a good thing. And I think answering the question around how we came together, there's a couple of parts to that story. I think one is centered very much around Academy XI, because that was kind of the place that brought us together. So my reasons for coming into Academy XI was as a student. My background is running digital agencies and building digital capability within those environments. And one of my tasks at that time was considering service design as a practice and building it out. So a big hands-on person and believe in understanding and knowing before asking others. So I joined that service design course to get a better understanding of what it was, having worked with service designers, and in the process of doing that, Steve was my instructor.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to have had some great experience working with great organisations around the world, delivering on large-scale transformation change and service design, and being a global community practice leader in one of the global consulting firms for that practice, and watching how it evolved and the types of challenges it had. I had this real yearning to develop without the constraints that a large organisation had, that allows us to deliver to the real needs of our customers. And that's really what Stick was born of. And then through the work I've done with Academy XI and the great students and other people I've met, returning to Australia, it's really been an opportunity to find the right people to deliver on that vision.
I guess the line that we talk about when we describe ourselves is we essentially help organisations craft futures that stick. And if you pull that apart a little bit, there's a few bits of it that sort of make up the whole story, but it's very much centred on organisations that have a remit or interest in driving change, and we underpin that by supporting it with design practices and principles. And the stick piece, it's funny because when people ask us about stick and what it means, it's kind of, there's a couple of dual meanings to it. There's the very literal one around stick, so the idea is that it's not just about coming up with design as a principle or a theory, but how you actually bring that into practice in an organisation so that it effectively sticks the landing, lasts, works, is operationalised. And then you said when you talk about stick, you talk about it in terms of behaviours.
Yeah, so for me, when I talk about Stick and what we do, we're very much sort of traversing abstract strategies and how they're made real through the human experience. And making them real through the human experience is all around incentivising the right behaviours to drive those outcomes that an organisation is looking to achieve.
And as to the question around why stick is spelled S-T-C-K or appears to be, and that's the way it is, if you actually look at the logo and the way that it works, the T and the I together make a little person is one interpretation, and people are central to what we do, and therefore it kind of made sense in terms of how you would illustrate that. And there's a colour variation as well where it also looks like a carrot. Another variation on the stick and the carrot is the idea that it's about incentivising behaviours, and therefore that's another play on the stick.
2021, I mean, what a year with so much promise off the back of 2020. I think there's a number of things that are happening that we're starting to see come through, and one of the biggest ones, and one of the ones I've been focusing on a lot, is this need to drive change, new ways of working, new ways of behaving. And rather than seeing things continue the way they have in the past, where change is shoehorned into organisations, I'm really passionate about this term we've coined, adoption and influence, and the practice around that. So rather than shoehorning the change in, how can we empower and enable individuals in an organisation to drive and own the outcomes that they're delivering to?
And I think a lot of the conversations that we're having last year and into the new year, and that's driving a lot of focus for us building on that, is I think a lot of companies are looking at the elements of their organisation where change is required. And I think there's been a lot of focus on customer and customer experience, and that's really good. And it's not that that's an ongoing thing that people need to work on. But I think the underlying factors that help support a lot of that change is where the focus seems to be. There's a lot of employee experience, internal experience. Where we're getting involved is kind of interesting too. I mean, we've had requests from sales teams to better embed design practices and principles and helping them understand how they can uncover opportunities. Tech adoption, where it's not just about, cool, we've chosen the tech, but how do we actually make, what influences and behaviours need to be defined? How do we help make that stick? I feel like those things are definitely getting a lot more focus in the new year.
And I think the other thing that comes straight to mind for me is that as we're seeing design craft mature in organisations and across all fields, we're seeing people become better at asking for help. So the market is putting out better requests for proposal, both at a public and private stance.
Yeah, so I think once upon a time you might have got a blanket ask for, we need help with a customer experience strategy, or we might need help with service design. There's a lot more nuance in it, so people are able to say, well, I understand specifically how design could help me in this context.
So I think that it's an interesting one to talk about as an organisation moves to be 100% remote, because that's not in any way unique. And I think as that happens and how organisations start to think more about that, it's important that we acknowledge where that's going to create efficiencies and where that's going to create inefficiencies. And for me, a specific reflection on this was having a Zoom call of all things with a bunch of guys I did a master's with years ago. In the room we had one guy that ran a large team. He had 1,500 people working for him. Another guy was running a mid-sized business. I think he had 30 odd people working directly for him as a CEO in that business, and they had a broad range of other people with smaller teams. The two guys that I mentioned first, they were both saying how great this is, how much more efficient they are. They don't have to fly around the world in the country to go to meetings each month. They aren't getting distracted by people catching them in the hallways so much and that sort of thing. Whereas the other people in the room were far more, well, hang on, my job's got harder. My need to collaborate, my need to engage with people and get things through and not have them come to me or be in this formal context is far greater. And I think that's just as true when you're doing the type of complex problem solving that we're doing. And whilst we've created mechanisms and ways to address that, there's definitely going to be, I think, a greater awareness of what those challenges are that evolves over the coming year as this becomes the new normal. And if we do go back to the office part-time, how those things are done in a way that gets greater effectiveness.
Yeah, and I think because the nature of what we do is fluid in the way that it rolls into solving problems as well, that it is adaptable and applicable to a range of different things. So I think the fact that, like we said before, the fact that the asks are becoming more nuanced and specific, they're quite easy for us to sort of adopt and roll with, because the practices that we deliver are designed to work in complex and abstract kind of environments and be comfortable in those, which I think is a big thing that a lot of other ways of dealing with problems are not so.
I mean, and that's the exciting thing, right? Like we're not wedded to the approaches and things we've done before. Like, I don't imagine I'll call myself a service designer or a strategic designer forever. I think that they're definitely fantastically useful skills, methods, and tools that come from that practice, but they're going to evolve and change, and as they do, the language will change, and I think we need to with it.